Hi, everyone. My name is Yana Ludwig, and I am running to be Wyoming's next U.S. Senator. A little over a month ago, our campaign released a 5-page position paper on a public bank for Wyoming, and then held a town hall session that was attended by folks from the National Public Banking Institute and one lone state legislator, Republican Bill Henderson from Laramie County, who's on a number of committees, including the Minerals, Business, and Economic Development Committee and the Revenue Committee. And we were super glad to have Bill be there and be curious enough to be checking out what we were up to. Well, in the last month, we've seen folks starting to get intrigued with this proposal. We got it included in the Wyoming State Democratic Party platform along with postal banking. We also released this very cool graphic to help people wrap their heads around what a public bank would mean. It's also been a topic of discussion at a number of events that I've appeared at. The most fun moment for me was probably last week when I was at an event in Saratoga, and it turns out that Jay Sjogren was there. Now, Jay won a Nobel Prize for his economic work related to climate disruption, and while he was at this event as a musician, which was awesome. It was the first time I've gotten to hear live music for months, but he wasn't there with his economics hat on. He did weigh in and he said that he thinks that this sounds like a sound idea for Wyoming. And it was really nice to get that support from someone who really knows Wyoming and really knows his stuff around economics. We're excited to have some momentum gaining behind this idea. Matt Stannard, who co authored the paper with me, and I have been contemplating a Wyoming public bank for about 4 years, but the timing never felt quite right to try to bring it to the people. We worked together on public banking during the time that I was the executive director of Commonomics USA, and Matt was the policy director. The most exciting thing that we did on public banking, at least for me, in that time was that we organized and facilitated a pair of public forums in California that brought together public banking advocates with fossil fuel divestment advocates. While a lot of different pieces came together to get California's new public banking law passed, we were definitely part of that puzzle. And I'm holding a lot of what I heard from activists there as I'm thinking about what makes sense for Wyoming. It feels like now is finally the time for Wyoming to take this up. We are going to need a number of creative innovations to help ease the growing struggle and pain that we're seeing around our state as our economy is being run into the ground by a combination of COVID-19, the collapse of fossil fuels, and our state legislature's stubborn refusal to do some sensible things like expand Medicaid, legalize marijuana, and diversify our energy sector with solar and wind. So it's against this backdrop that we propose a public bank, very similar to what our conservative neighbors in North Dakota have had for over 100 years. In 2008, North Dakota had one of the most stable economies during the economic crisis, and a lot of people think that was because of their public bank. And more recently, they did the best job of any state at smoothly and responsibly distributing federal bailout funds for small businesses in of all the states in the country. And the Bank of North Dakota has a far better return on investment than your average bank. It's just a really solid business model and a really solid mechanism for strengthening local communities in a conservative state like ours. The Public Banking Institute, and particularly its founder, Ellen Brown, have done a really amazing job documenting some of the economic impacts of not using public finance. The most significant one in my mind is that interest can actually double the cost of infrastructure projects. So, for instance, a $1 million infrastructure project can actually end up costing the taxpayers $2 million because of the high interest rates that are usually charged from bank loans. So, literally, anything you do to try to benefit our communities, repairing roads, building dams that our farmers need, something like rural broadband, if you are financing those through traditional lenders, interest is going to be a huge line item, and we literally get nothing for all of that money here in Wyoming. So, a public bank would allow the state to directly finance projects for our communities and charge far less in interest while still making money for the state through low risk investments. Everybody wins, but especially taxpayers and our municipal governments. And our lawmakers in Cheyenne would also have a big win because they would be creating a permanent net positive line item for the state budget that desperately needs a whole bunch of those. This would certainly not be the full fix for our financial woes. But here are some very simple and pretty low-balled numbers that we ran for our paper. If a Wyoming state bank were seeded with $2 billion from our mineral funds, which need to be invested somewhere, and was lending at 60% of its capacity. So of that 2 billion, 60% is about 1.2 billion being loaned out at any given time for community projects. And say they were charging an average of 1.5% interest on all of those loans, so very low interest for our communities. The bank would generate approximate annual revenues for the state budget of around $18 million. Now, like I say, we lowballed that. Say we invested $4 billion and charged 2%. At that same 60% investment rate in any given year, that would give us about $48 million per year for the state budget. And our state and county budgets would not have to be as big to do as much for our communities. And maybe we could even get our roads repaired in Laramie and other cities a little bit faster. Just a thought. We could also use the bank as the primary lender for Wyoming student loans, also at these very low interest rates and fixed rates. So instead of our students getting saddled with 4 to 8% on their student loans, they could get those loans at 1.5 or 2%, which means being able to pay them off and move on with their lives a lot faster. This could also help fulfill Wyoming's constitutional commitment to accessible public education. Finally, we would stop sending hard-earned Wyoming dollars to Wall Street to fatten the profits of already wealthy financiers, something that many of us across the political spectrum find deeply offensive. I would much rather have that money stay here and be invested in creating the future that Wyoming wants for itself. So I want to emphasize one more thing. This is not a liberal or conservative proposal. North Dakotans across the political spectrum really love their public bank. And the one other report that I can find of this being proposed in Wyoming definitely did not come from a progressive. So Rex Ramel ran as the Constitution Party's nominee for Wyoming governor in 2018. Rex defines himself as a constitutional conservative and suggested chartering a Wyoming state bank. Rex said, instead of investing Wyoming savings around $20 billion in the stock and bond markets, which is risky, I would invest it back in Wyoming in the form of business loans for new and existing businesses. Capital loans for startup businesses would bring investors and jobs to Wyoming, and existing businesses could expand and strengthen current operations, end quote. So that's another potential use for a public bank. We could be investing in small businesses, Wyoming-owned businesses, and start shifting who actually has economic power and gets the profits from our business activity in Wyoming more toward Wyoming-owned businesses. Now, I disagree with Rex on any number of things, but not this. I think this is an excellent place for us to be focusing on states' rights and local control. So we'll repost the link for our 5-page paper if you want to get more information about public banking and see the details of what we're proposing. And also, we will repost that great graphic so you can share it with folks in your life if you think that they might be interested. I also need to remind folks, as usual, that this was paid for by Yana for Wyo. And if you like what we're up to and want this kind of innovative thinking in your U.S. Senator, please make a donation. This campaign is only getting individual donations, and our average donation is about $23. And you can find us on ActBlue by searching for Yana Ludwig or Yana for Wyo. Thanks so much for watching.